Howdy, America. What's going on, y'all? Welcome to special edition of WYS Live. So glad to see you out there. I see you out in the chat out there. Willie, what's going on? Salute to you as well. God bless, sir. So great to be here with you on a Friday evening, not a scheduled typical stream, but last night we had some technical difficulties right before our very last story of the evening kicked off. So we're doing a solo episode about it, and maybe it warrants it anyway, because there's lots of threats growing out there that we've all heard about: EMPs, nuke strikes, hypersonic weapons that the Chinese, Russians, and now North Koreans have. There's unrest all across the globe, and America, as always, is pulled into the middle of it. We're out there trying to support Israel, so we claim, while we're also giving Iran billions and billions of dollars and therefore funding everybody that's fighting against Israel. Taiwan, is China going to try to invade the same way Russia did as soon as Biden took over? We shall see. But a few things I should say to you: do not be afraid, because those of us in Christ have the victory already. We have nothing to fear ever. But also, you want to look out for your family. You want to look out for your loved ones. You want to look out for yourself in times of trouble. And so we put together a little bit of a guide, a little bit of a checklist that you can use reference for to try to see your preparedness level, your and any place that you might lack that you can address. So before we get into the list, before we get into the ins and outs, I got a couple of articles to share with you about the potential dangers we face. One of them is an actual report and based off of a government document that was declassified about the EMP risks. And the other is a nuclear strike on DC scenario that was just recently declassified. That I'm going to read both of these in their entirety. I don't usually do that. I usually give you the cliff notes and then elaborate more. But since we only have one story to go over in this live stream, I'm going to take a little more time to do that. But B, I think both of them are full of information that you might should know, and I think be aware of. Lastly, before we get into it, I will say when I get to the second article, there's some graphic detail about what would happen to the populace if there was a nuclear strike on the Pentagon. It goes minute by minute, hour by hour. So any young ears, you might want to act accordingly. So first story up. One moment. All right. This is a Forbes article, and it's not very old. Let's see. From March 20th last year, so a year old. Protecting America's power grids from EMP attacks. What is the exact intended purpose of China's intelligence collection balloons? You know, the one that we had a second one fly over just a couple of months ago. Electronic warfare or reconnaissance? Neither of these should be dismissed, but there was another nefarious goal as well. Electromagnetic pulsars threatened U.S. grid security. The possibility of such an attack is growing as EMP technology is evolving. The Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from EMP Attacks, alongside military officials, warned years ago of the possibility of balloon-based EMP attacks. Given that our grid infrastructure is weak, aging, and lacks resilience, EMP attacks could become the choice weapon of America's enemies, and not just China. And you think that the Biden administration doesn't know this? You think they're not aware of this? Meanwhile, they just let the balloon fly entirely over the continental United States of America and complete its entire journey all the way to the Atlantic Ocean before they shot it down. Don't forget that. Don't forget who's bought and paid for and in the pocket of President Xi Jinping. An EMP produces a powerful wave of energy that causes dramatic voltage surges in electric systems. As a result, it can shut down vast areas of electric grids, systems, and devices while drastically overheating, degrading, or destroying their components. Unlike cyber attacks, which target computer systems of power grids, EMPs act at the physical level, impacting wider range of systems such as car engines, cell phone transmitters, transformers, and backup power generator systems. The impact of an EMP attack in the U.S. would be catastrophic. Experts argue that the U.S. is incredibly ill-prepared for such an event, with former CIA Director James Woolsey calling it, quote, one of the greatest national vulnerabilities, end quote. Beyond the impact on critical business and financial operations, access to necessities such as water and medicine could also be severely limited. And freaking half the population's on prescriptions and medicines. The recovery process for most vital systems would take weeks, while full recovery will require years of repair, replacements, and cost trillions of dollars. The lack of access to electricity shouldn't be dismissed as a mere inconvenience. It directly impacts people's lives. The 2018 report of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from Electromagnetic Pulse Attack estimated that over the course of a year, following an EMP attack, millions of excess deaths could result, with the upper bounds of a successful EMP attack being in the 90% casualty range. Did you hear that right? If they hit us with an EMP, which is just a nuke detonated in the atmosphere in space, it doesn't even have to, it's not a direct strike on the land with the mushroom cloud, fireball, people burning alive, radioactive fallout, none of that. It's in space, it's in the atmosphere. But if it's over America, the shock wave, the EMP will be so catastrophic that it would shut down your computers, your electric grid, the water systems, everything else. And this says it could take over a year or years to get fully back online, and that upwards of 90% of the U.S. population could die. Not trying to scare you, just trying to let you know, trying to have you ready for anything, because we cover all these kind of topics on here. We cover how the Democrats are actively facilitating the fall of the West, and some of them openly say it. So without a single troop, without a single explosion on the earth, this could happen. The article continues. With EMP warfare, the advantage lies with the first striker, as the attack has crippling effect on vital systems of the target country with limited second strike capacity. While China and Russia can execute such an attack via intercontinental ballistic missiles armed with high-altitude nuclear explosive warheads geared to radiation, not heat or explosion, terrorist organizations could also orchestrate a small non-nuclear EMP attack if a state sponsor provides them with access to an appropriate system. Procurement and manufacturing of such devices has become relatively easy, given access to the internet and consumer-grade equipment. America's poor record in Iraq and Afghanistan against sustained insurgencies could embolden non-state actors to also pursue such attacks. U.S. adversaries are also developing strategies for using their existing nuclear capabilities for EMP purposes and developed advanced non-nuclear EMP weapons such as the high-powered microwave. A 2020 report by EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security has found that China's EMP development and deployment strategies are making rapid advancements. The report also finds that the use of cyber warfare and EMP would be the People Liberation Army's central strategy against the U.S., and that it could be used to conduct a first strike surprise attack. A pulse attack could be used on a smaller scale to disable specific military targets such as ballistic missile bases and aircraft carriers. It could also be used to conduct a sweeping attack on vast elements of military and civilian infrastructure to cripple rapid response and recovery. There's also a chance for naturally occurring pulse because of a gamma ray burst, solar coronal mass ejection, which could have just as devastating consequences. The chances of a powerful solar pulse hitting Earth are estimated approximately 12% within the next 10 years, threatening U.S. infrastructure, even during peacetime. Despite these warnings and increasing danger, the U.S. government's response to tackling EMP threats has been lackluster. The proposed GRID Act of 2010 and SHIELD Act of 2013, which aimed to address some of these concerns, failed to gain enough traction. Thanks, Congress. Grid hardening is an expensive process involving the grounding of power lines and constructing shielding containers and mechanisms. Additionally, there is public awareness and political will deficit to solving this important issue. Now, this has been talked about. They've done this for a long time and have done nothing. Nothing. Meanwhile, China, as this report states, has focused their technology and their efforts for such an attack and for a first strike capability, which means, hello, all of our military, everything we're running on is based on electricity and satellites. It's the most advanced military in the world, but because it runs off electricity and all this high technology, all these computer chips will be fried in an instant. So this is real serious stuff. Despite this, there's been some progress. In 2019, the Trump administration passed the Coordinating National Resilience to Electromagnetic Pulses executive order meant to facilitate research on EMP vulnerabilities, improve response, and develop guidance on adequate protection strategies. Thanks, Trump. The August 2022 DHS Electromagnetic Pulse Shielding Mitigations Report provides a brief assessment of EMP vulnerabilities and some best practices and protective technologies. Fortunately, EMP mitigation technology is becoming more accessible and affordable, and the danger is thoroughly understood, finally. For example, Centerpoint, along with Siemens, has developed grid hardening solutions at 25% of the cost, which could be retrofitted into the existing infrastructure. Let's get on it, y'all. The Biden administration's recent $13 billion investment in the U.S. energy grid is a step in the right direction to improve reliability and capacity of the grid, as well as improving security systems against cyber attacks. Unfortunately, the program fails to mention EMP mitigation technologies. So that's what we're calling Build Back Better, huh? Because, you know, China don't want you to have those in there. I wonder why he wouldn't put them in there. Hello. He bought and paid for. As the U.S. becomes increasingly reliant on green technology and ever-sprawling and more computerized and sophisticated power grids, we become more and more vulnerable to EMP attacks. As our adversaries look towards new forms of warfare, it is important that our leaders don't ignore this critical vulnerability. A widespread investment in grid hardening technology, grounding of power and transmission lines, and the protection of critical grid systems are imperative to mitigate our adversaries' first strike advantage and protect the vital infrastructure which makes modern life possible. And if all else fails, our adversaries should have no doubt a significant EMP attack would trigger a full-scale, overwhelming, massive retaliation nuclear strike on their vital and most valuable targets. So make no mistake, EMP, as it said, if it's successful enough, could take out 90% of the United States population. 90%. That means get in a room with 9 of your best friends or family members and one of y'all is getting out, mathematically. Now, maybe all of y'all get out because you watch this show or you're in tune to what's going on in the world, and maybe you've done a little preparing. And we're going to help you see how ready you are and also give you some tips and maybe fill in some gaps that you might not have already. But the government knows this is the strategy. And stopping a weapon from going off in space, that's much different than a ballistic missile, which has to enter space and then come back down to Earth. Most of our missile defense systems are for that second phase. They don't intercept a missile when it launches. They intercept the missile on the return to Earth. So if a missile only goes to space, from a boat even, in the middle of the ocean, there's half the time to react, intercept, and the capabilities are limited for such a necessary response. So that's EMP. That's how they wipe out a huge percentage of the U.S. population without directly killing anybody. No bullets, no bombs, nothing. Everything looks fine, and all of a sudden it goes dark. And then the chaos ensues. People haven't, they don't have a year's supply of medicine. They don't have a year's supply of food. They don't have a year's supply of clean water. They don't have clothing that are mobile enough to get out of a danger zone and get to a safer route. Half people don't even have maps. They could use their phone for the GPS to know how to get somewhere. You can see how this could turn chaotic very, very quickly. Yes, I see you out there, chat. Federal government is always 10 years behind with computers. That unfortunately seems to be the case. Now, this next story, like I said, gets a little graphic. So here's your last warning. If you're a little, sensitive to that, or if you have ears in the room that might be sensitive to that. But this is very important to understand what could happen in a situation like this if it actually went full nuclear. Because after we were launched on with an EMP attack, and see, what was scary about that is they said they could outsource the technology to a terrorist group. China could just arm a terrorist group that could then do it, and China take no responsibility of it. Now, I think that our government would be a little smarter than that and be a little more capable than that to know where it came from and how to retaliate. But then you're talking about super global, catastrophic Armageddon type nuclear war at that point, which we've had Russia talk about nukes in this Ukraine conflict. Iran's trying to get nukes right now, who says Israel needs to be wiped off the map. Nuclear conflict, if you're looking at a scale of danger or risk, is at a heightened alert at maybe a point we've never seen since the Cold War. But this next story is a declassified story. The day of nuclear Armageddon. Newly declassified documents. This is from the Daily Mail. And this is from this week. Newly declassified documents reveal a macabre, minute-by-minute detail what the end of the world would look like and why those vaporized instantly by an atomic bomb will be the lucky ones. This is crazy stuff. All right, and it's a little long, but it's written kind of like a story, so hopefully it's entertaining enough to you. But I think it's important to actually realize we've all seen movies. We've all heard about Hiroshima, Nagasaki. We've seen some videos, heard about the nuclear fallout, the radiation that killed people months afterwards, and the deformations and stuff that happened to the next generation. We've heard about all that kind of stuff. But what would it really be like if it hit the Pentagon? And that's what this is about. The story of what the moments after a nuclear missile launch would look like is based on facts sourced from exclusive interviews with presidential advisors, cabinet members, nuclear weapons engineers, scientists, soldiers, airmen, special operators, Secret Service, emergency management experts, intelligence analysts, civil servants, and others, just in case they didn't cover everybody, who have worked on these macabre scenarios over decades. Macabre, for anybody that doesn't know that word, means horrible, horrific, gross, just catastrophic. As the plans for general nuclear war are among the most classified secrets held by the U.S. government, the scenario postulated here takes the reader up to the razor's edge of what can legally be known. Declassified documents obfuscated for decades fill in the details with terrifying clarity. I almost went live when this came out the other day, but I just didn't want to be an alarmist or whatever and just say, nuclear war is going, get in your bunkers. But this is crazy. This is brand new. What's the date on this? This is April 6th, updated April 7th. So it's been updated even once since it came out. All right. Because the Pentagon is a top target for a strike. Excuse me, I hit the link. My bad. Because the Pentagon is a top target for a strike by America's nuclear-armed enemies, the scenario that follows, Washington, D.C. gets hit first with a 1 megaton thermonuclear bomb. A, quote, bolt out of the blue, end quote, attack against D.C. is what everyone in D.C. fears most, says Andrew Weber, former Assistant Secretary of the Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. Bolt out of the blue is how U.S. Nuclear Command and Control refers to an unwarned large nuclear attack. The strike on D.C. initiates the beginning of an Armageddon-like nuclear war that will almost certainly follow. There is no such thing as a small nuclear war, is an oft-repeated phrase in Washington. That makes a lot of sense. A nuclear strike on the Pentagon is just the beginning of a scenario of the finality of which will be the end of civilization as we know it, for sure. This is the reality of the world in which we live. The nuclear war scenario proposed in this book could happen tomorrow or later today. Quote, the world could end in the next couple of hours, warns General Robert Keller, the former commander of the United States Strategic Command. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody. Not trying to scare anybody. It's just important to note you're not going to get a week's notice. By the way, China's attacking next week. It's not happening like that. So once again, this is not alarmism. This is just for preparedness' sake. A 1 megaton thermonuclear weapon detonating begins with a flash of light and heat so tremendous it is impossible for the human mind to comprehend. 180 million degrees Fahrenheit. 180 million degrees Fahrenheit is 4 or 5 times hotter than the temperature of the center of the sun. In the first fraction of a millisecond after the bomb strikes the Pentagon outside Washington, D.C., there is light. Soft X-ray light with a very short wavelength. The light superheats the surrounding air to millions of degrees, creating a massive fireball that expands at millions of miles per hour. Within a few seconds, the fireball has increased to a diameter of a little more than a mile. Its heat so intense that concrete explodes, metal melts or evaporates, stone shatters, and people instantaneously convert into combusting carbon. The 5-story, 5-sided structure of the Pentagon and everything inside its 6.5 million square foot office space explodes into a superheated dust, all the walls shattering with near simultaneous arrival of a shockwave. All 27,000 employees perish instantly. Not a single thing in the fireball remains. Nothing. Ground zero is zeroed. Traveling at the speed of light, the radiating heat from the fireball ignites everything flammable several miles in every direction. Curtains, paper, books, wood fences, clothing, and dry leaves explode into flames and become kindling for a great firestorm that begins to consume a 100 or more square mile area that prior to this flash of light was the beating heart of American governance and home to 6 million people. Several hundred feet northwest of the Pentagon, all 639 acres of Arlington National Cemetery, including 400,000 sets of bones and gravestones honoring the war dead, the 3,800 buried African-American freed people, the visitors paying respects on this late winter afternoon, the groundskeepers mowing lawns, the arborists tending trees, the tour guides touring, the white glove members of the old guard keeping watch over the tomb of the unknowns. They are all instantly transformed into charred human figurines, into soot, instantly. Those incinerated are spared the horror that begins to be inflicted on the 1 to 2 million people gravely injured but not yet dead. Across the Potomac River, a mile to the northeast, the marble walls and columns of the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial superheat, split, burst apart, and disintegrate. The steel and stone bridges and highways connecting these historic monuments to the surrounding environs heat and collapse. To the south, across Interstate 395, the spacious glass-walled fashion center at Pentagon City, with its abundance of stores filled with high-end clothing brands, household goods, restaurants and offices, food courts, and the adjacent Ritz-Carlton Pentagon City Hotel, are all obliterated. Ceiling joists, 2x4s, escalators, chandeliers, rugs, furniture, mannequins, dogs, squirrels, people all burst into flames. It has been 3 seconds since the initial blast. There's a baseball game going on 2.5 miles due west at Nationals Park. The clothing on the majority of the 35,000 people watching the game catch fire. Those who don't quickly burn to death suffer intense third-degree burns. Their bodies are stripped of the outer layer of skin, exposing bloody dermis underneath. Third-degree burns require immediate specialized care and often limb amputation to prevent death. In Nationals Park, there might be a few thousand who somehow survive. They were inside buying food or using the bathrooms, and they now desperately need a burn treatment center. But there are only 10 specialized burn beds in the entire Washington metropolitan area at the MedStar Washington Hotel's Burn Center in central D.C., and because this facility is about 5 miles northeast of the Pentagon, it no longer functions, if even exists. This is going to continue. It's horrifying to think about already. Remember, this was 3 seconds. 3 seconds after the blast. This stadium is 3 miles due west. Clothes catch fire. Skin melts off. All that's left is your exposed muscle tissue and dermis. It's horrible. It's horrible. We're going to keep going. Within seconds, the thermal radiation has deeply burned the skin on roughly 1 million people. Within seconds, and 90% of them will die. They didn't disintegrate instantly. They have an agonizing death. Most won't make it more than a few steps from where they're standing when the bomb detonates. They will become what civil defense experts referred to in the 1950s when these grim calculations became to be as dead when found. At Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, a 1,000-acre military facility across the Potomac to the southeast, there are another 17,000 victims, including almost everyone working at the Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters, the White House Communications Agency headquarters, the U.S. Coast Guard Station, Washington, the Marine One helicopter hangar, and scores of other heavily guarded federal facilities that cater to the nation's security. At the National Defense University, a majority of the 4,000 students are dead or dying. With no shortness of tragic irony, this university, parentheses, funded by the This university, funded by the Pentagon and founded on America's 200th birthday, is where officers go to learn military tactics to achieve U.S. national security dominance around the world. This university is not the only military-themed higher learning institution obliterated in the nuclear first strike. The Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy, the National War College, the Inter-American Defense College, the Africa Center for Strategic Studies all immediately ceased to exist. Humans created the nuclear weapon in the 20th century to save the world from evil, and now in the 21st century, the nuclear weapon is about to destroy it. The science behind the bomb is profound. Embedded in the thermonuclear flash of light are two pulses of thermal radiation. The first pulse lasts a fraction of a second, after which comes the second pulse, which lasts several seconds and causes human skin to ignite and burn. The light pulses are silent. What follows is a thunderous roar. The intense heat generated by this nuclear explosion creates a high pressure wave that moves out from its center point like a tsunami, a giant wall of highly compressed air traveling faster than the speed of sound. It mows people down, hurls others into the air, bursts lungs and eardrums, sucks bodies up and spits them out. Quote, in general, large buildings are destroyed by the change in air pressure, while people and objects such as trees and utility poles are destroyed by the wind. Notes an archivist who compiles these morbid statistics for the Atomic Archive. As the nuclear fireball grows, this shock front delivers catastrophic destruction, bulldozing everything in its path for 3 miles. The air behind the blast wave accelerates, creating winds that reach several hundred miles per hour, extraordinary speeds that are difficult to fathom. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy, which caused $55 billion worth of damage and killed 233 people from the Caribbean to Canada, had a maximum sustained winds of roughly 80 miles an hour. The highest wind speed on Earth is 253, ever recorded, 253 miles an hour at a remote weather station in Australia. This says, what was this saying a second ago? Or I haven't gotten to it yet. That which is not crushed by the blast is torn apart by this whipping wind. Objects as small as computers and cement blocks and as large as 18-wheeler trucks are double-decker tour buses become airborne like tennis balls. The nuclear fireball that has consumed everything in the initial 1.1-mile radius now rises up from the earth at a rate of 250 to 350 feet per second. This is the big fireball that you always picture, the big mushroom cloud. This is just now happening. Now that this is, before all this started rising up to the big fireball, all this other calamity and tragedy happened. And now we're getting the fireball. This is how soon after this blast we still are. I see the chat. Willie says he's hunkered down in rural Arizona. I hope he got plenty of water out there in the desert, Willie. That would be my main concern, not knowing much more about where you're at, my guy. Let's see here. 35 seconds passed. It's been 35 seconds, yo. The formation of the iconic mushroom cloud begins. Its massive cap and stem, made up of incinerated people and civilians' debris, transmutes from a red to a brown to an orange hue. Next comes the deadly reverse suction effect, with objects, cars, people, light poles, street signs, parking meters getting sucked back into the center of the burning inferno and consumed by flame. 60 seconds pass. We're a minute in. The mushroom cap and stem, now grayish white, rises up 5, then 10 miles from ground zero. The cap grows too, stretching out 20, 30 miles across, billowing and blowing further out. Eventually, it reaches the troposphere, higher than commercial flights. Radioactive Particles then spew across everything below as fallout, raining back down on the Earth. A nuclear bomb produces a witch's brew of radioactive products, which are also entrained in the cloud. The astrophysicist Carl Sagan warned decades ago. More than 1 million people are now dead or dying, and fewer than 2 minutes have passed since detonation. Now the inferno begins. This is different than the initial fireball. It's a mega fire beyond measure. Gas lines explode one after the next, acting like giant flamethrowers, spewing steady streams of fire. Tanks containing flammable materials burst open. Chemical factories explode. Pilot lights on water heaters and furnaces act like torchlighters, setting anything not already burning alight. Collapsed buildings become giant ovens. Open gaps in floors and roofs have become like chimneys. Carbon dioxide from the firestorm sinks down and settles into the metro subways and tunnels, asphyxiating passengers in their seats. People seeking shelter in basements and other spaces below ground vomit, convulse, become comatose, and die. Anyone above ground who is looking directly at the blast, in some cases as far as 13 miles away, is blinded. 15 miles out from the Pentagon, cars and buses crash into one another. Asphalt streets turn to liquid from intense heat. Asphalt turns to liquid from intense heat, trapping survivors as if caught in molten lava or quicksand. Hurricane-force winds fuel hundreds of fires into thousands of fires into millions of fires. 10 miles out, hot burning ash and flaming wind-borne debris ignite new fires, conflating one after another. All of Washington, D.C. becomes one mega inferno. 8, maybe 9 minutes pass. 10 and 12 miles out from ground zero, survivors shuffle in shock like the almost dead. Unsure of what just happened, desperate to escape. Tens of thousands of people have ruptured lungs. Crows, sparrows, and pigeons overhead catch fire and drop from the sky as if it is raining birds. There is no electricity, no phone service, no 911. The electromagnetic pulse, EMP, which we just talked about, of the bomb obliterates all radio, internet, and TV. Cars with electric ignition systems cannot restart. Water stations cannot pump water. Saturated with lethal levels of radiation, and the entire area is a no-go zone. Not for days will the rare survivors realize that help is not coming. Those who somehow manage to escape death from the blast, shockwave, and firestorm suddenly realize an insidious truth about nuclear war, that they are entirely on their own. Former Federal Agency Management Agency Director Craig Fugate says their only hope for survival is to figure out how to, quote, self-survive. That begins a fight for food, water. How and why do U.S. defense scientists know such hideous things and with exacting precision? How does the U.S. government know so many nuclear effects-related facts while the general public remains blind? The answer is as grotesque as the questions themselves, because for all these years, since the end of the Second World War, the U.S. government has been preparing for and rehearsing plans for a general nuclear war. A nuclear World War III that is guaranteed to leave, at minimum, 2 billion dead. That's crazy stuff. That was just declassified about what would happen in a blue light strike, a unprovoked, unprepared for, unwarned first strike on the U.S. Pentagon and D.C. I don't say that to scare anybody. I say that to let you know what's possible. Let you know that the bad guys, the evil players in this global game have these capabilities. And we're target number 1, baby. So there are some things you can do. Now, if you're in the epicenter of a nuclear bomb strike, there ain't shit you can do. But if this EMP attack comes and knocks out the U.S. electrical grid, or if you're 100 miles away from a nuclear strike and everything happens, chaos ensues, there's a fight for food and water, traffic, you can't drive anywhere. It's like The Walking Dead. All the cars run out of gas trying to get places. The cars are just stranded on highways. People are on foot. You need to know how to protect yourself and your family. And what we've done is I've compiled a list, a prepper checklist, that are things you might want to consider to better be prepared for oncoming disaster. Now, this is not some fringe stuff. It used to kind of be fringe, all this prepping and whatever. Bill Gates used to make fun of preppers. Now he's building his own bunker. What should that tell you? It's estimated as many as 10% of the U.S. population, actually up to potentially 15% or 16% of the U.S. population is now what they would consider to be a prepper. I don't know exactly what you have to do to meet those qualifications, but that's the new stats. So here's the checklist that I've compiled that I'm going to go through with you right now so that you can be prepared for anything. Terrorist attack, cyber attack, EMP, full-on war, global world war, to protect yourself and your family. Water. You need a gallon per person a day. I see Willie say there's a steady creek running through town and a steady river 30 minutes from here. That's great. And the reason that's great, before I keep going, I'll address that specifically. The reason that's great is because it's flowing water. Now, what is potentially risky is you need to know where that water source is coming from. In the case of a nuclear strike or something where there's radioactive material, you need to make sure that your water source is not flowing from a contaminated area to you and to your water source. So that's the main thing about flowing water. But if not, flowing water is the best thing to be around. Ponds, lakes, those things become contaminated when everybody has to go to them to start to bathe in, clean in, wash their dishes in, everything else. Over time, those stagnant sources can become contaminated. So flowing water is great as long as it's flowing from an uncontaminated source. But you need 1 gallon per person per day of water. Food, you need about 1,500 calories per day per person. So that's lots of different ways you can do food. Freeze-dried food. You need water usually to add to that, to cook it. Soups, canned goods, all this sorts of stuff. I mean, all of our grandparents probably canned back in the day. They were in some ways better prepared for this, and the technology didn't even exist. But yes, food, you need 1,500 calories per person per day. You need a way to start a fire, lighters, matches, fire starters. You need light, flashlights, lanterns. You need heating and cooling, blankets, extra clothing depending on the climate. And if this is going to last, like this one EMP report said, for up to a year or multiple years, you need multiple seasons worth of clothing. Shelter, tarps, paracord. You need to be able to make makeshift shelter if you're out in the wilderness or out trying to travel from one place to another and you can't get anywhere. You need to be able to make a shelter. Let me move this bar down here. Here we go. Medical. How many Americans are on prescription drugs? You're not going to be able to get any more, okay? There are places that where you can get some prescription drugs and you can get a year's supply from. But in general, your prescriptions are for a month, couple of months at a time. So it's important to be able to have the medications, especially if you're relying on prescription drugs. When the system collapses, that's the end of your supply line. So it's good to have these things in supply. Hygiene, wipes, sanitizer, soap, comms, a ham radio, a NOAA radio. They have those hand-powered radios you can crank. The problem is with the EMP, all of these are going to be fried. But there's a way you can prevent that. We're going to get into that as well. Power, you need batteries, lots of batteries. Rechargeable batteries are great. Solar, anything solar that you can use. Solar, they have those solar rechargeable USB power bricks and things. Or solar generator you need. Tools, axe, shovel, wrenches, gloves, anything you can think of, saws. Guns and ammo. Guns and ammo is going to be huge. Here's one of those reasons why the founders got it right, and you're going to love your Second Amendment. And you need certain types of guns. You need guns to hunt. You need guns to hunt small game, like a 22 long rifle. And you need something for self-defense, because if you actually have prepped, people are going to want it, because people that haven't prepped, starving, and are dying are going to become desperate. Good people will turn to do things they never would have thought to stay alive and provide for their families. So you will need to be able to protect yourself as well, and you will need to have enough ammo to do so. Bartering, cash, alcohol, cigarettes. Look, people in these times need things like alcohol, cigarettes, things that can take their mind off of things. That will become a hot commodity. Cash it might become worthless in a situation like this. But everything else on this list that I've mentioned will become a barterable good. Precious metals is another one. But think about something like a cigarette lighter and a way to start fire. Having an abundance of cigarette lighters is a great thing to have on hand, and you can trade those as well in a situation like this. And lastly, EMP proof your home. There's different companies that have methods to do that. That would be if you're not leaving your home and you stay in your home throughout the full crisis, and ideally you can. There's also these containers that are EMP proof that you can put things like your solar generators in, your radios, anything electronic that you will need in a situation like this, in a doomsday scenario, can be stored in the EMP-proof container so that the shock wave does not destroy them, and afterwards you can take them out and still use them. Paper maps, I don't think I listed that. That's huge. If you do have to travel, you ain't going to be able to call up Google Maps, baby. Ain't going to be no Apple Maps telling you to turn right and 300 feet ahead, you will be arriving at your destination. No, you're going to have to know how to use maps and navigate that way. So, yes, I see you, chat. The hardest thing to stock up on is prescription drugs. There are companies that can help you get a year's supply of certain drugs that you might need for times like this. A good Google search would help you out. By the way, if anybody out there commercially is listening, it's a great time, food preparedness or anybody else, to sponsor the show. If you want to get a spot on here and tell people how to be prepared, there are some companies I could think off the top of my head that do have food storage, and you can stock up for years at a time on food that lasts you. I think the expiration date's like 5 to 10 years on it as you acquire it. So don't go broke trying to do this stuff now. But this is a good list. I'll put it back on screen. This is a good starting place so that you are prepared in the event that the world collapses. Bible says it's going to happen. So why not be prepared? I'm not planning on dying in that situation. But as that article said, up to 90% of the U.S. population could die if the power grid is down over a year. 90%. So once again, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just want you to be aware of things that you might not have thought of that you should be having in supply at home. And you also need a good bug out bag or a way to carry these. If you do have to leave, if you have to get out of town for any reason, this needs to be portable as possible so that you and your family can be safe. Okay, but just remember, like the Bible says, baby, if we're in Christ, we have the victory already. If no weapon formed against us will prosper. So never fear. Let not your heart be troubled. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Much love to see y'all out there. Thank you for all those that tuned in last night to episode 12. It was a great episode. We had a lot to talk about, and we actually had a video come out today that was just that Tucker Carlson bit from his interview on the 9th, where all that crazy propaganda was spewed all over his show that I can't believe he gave a platform to. So we addressed that issue by issue as well last night, and now there's a standalone video of just that clip. So don't forget to hit the like, hit the bell, hit the sub, tell your friends about the channel. Much love to all you guys out there. And remember, China, Russia, terrorists, anybody trying to attack us, anybody trying to take our rights away, our freedoms away, better watch your step. See y'all next time. God bless.